What's up, Bible 12? All right, here we go. It's our third day of class here on, it's not lockdown, what is this? Quarantine? Quarantine Watch 2020. So if you haven't already done it, I wanted you to start with that warm-up on 1 Peter 3:7. And the main assignments that you got today, I'll just run you through the assignments and then I'll hop into the PowerPoint. The main assignments that you have today are that warm up, and then after watching the little lecture part, or what you're watching right now, you can respond to this one assignment. It's called the Bible Sexist. It's in the homework classwork section under assignments. And then the exit ticket is doing the chapter summary notes. It's kind of like before with the star and the highlight. This one's a little different though, because this chapter has it's weird because it includes some content on, it's the chapter on prayer, but then there's also a bunch of content on sex, because the author actually weaves in some of that. And so in the margins, I want you to answer why is the author talking about sex in the chapter on prayer? So that's your exit ticket for the day. At 12:30, I'll be in my Zoom room. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add toward your little sidebar thing here at the bottom. I'll have a new tab that says Seals Zoom Classroom, and that's basically an open link to a room where I can be at any given time. Instead of sending you specific links that say, "All right, we're in a meeting in this window," you can drop in there. And that's just a set link of where you can hop into my Zoom classroom. So if you don't have the Zoom app already installed on your iPad, that'll probably make things a little bit more easy for you. And that link, again, will be right just above the settings thing at the bottom. I don't even know if you have a settings thing, but it'll be toward the bottom of all these options. So that's what's going on there. Also, yes, Jared, we are going to have our verse quiz. But the verse quiz this week is only 2 verses. It's not just because we're on shelter-in-place orders, but it's because I always do this because verses 11 and 12, it's the last one before the final verse quiz. And so it's, when I was a child, I talked like a child, thought like a child, reasoned like a child. And so it's this section right here. And yes, it's going to be an online quiz. And so naturally it's going to be super easy if you want to cheat. You don't have to. But in addition to quizzing you on making sure that you have this verse in your head, I'll also there will probably be a question or two on this Canvas quiz that I produce that will be checking your understanding to make sure that you kind of know what he's talking about. So if you don't get what this verse is all about, you're gonna have to do a little research. I dare you. Cool. So let's hop into it, and we're going to get into whether or not the biblical authors are sexist. So 1 Peter 3:7, right? You did this for the warm-up. If you haven't, pause now and go do that. Cool. So 1 Peter 3:7, Peter's writing, and he says, "Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner, and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers." Now, if you are a normal 21st century human being, what's going to be the first thing that stands out to you in this verse, or that raises alarm to you? If you are a modern progressive individual, this part right here, the weaker partner, treating wives as the weaker partner, is going to be the thing that stands out to you, right? Now, depending on the scholar that you read, some people would say that Peter is maybe tapping into Aristotelian philosophy and saying where Aristotle believed that women were actually kind of deformed versions of men, which is funny because I guess genetically it's kind of the opposite. But I don't know if it was necessarily Aristotelian, but it's Greek philosopher. A lot of Greek philosophers saw the male body as the ideal form. So the female body was the weaker form. And so some people would say that's what Peter's talking about here. Others would talk about modern complementarianists would say, okay, well, no, there are obvious differences between men and women, other than genitalia. There are things hormonal differences, and testosterone does different things to the body than estrogen. But either way, a lot of times we focus in on those 2 words, the weaker partner. And right, wrong, or indifferent, Peter is writing in a context, in a world where that's assumed. Notice that he doesn't say, like, treat them with respect and make sure that you believe they're the weaker partner. He's like taking it for granted that his audience assumes that the woman is the weaker partner. Um, so if we kind of like back off of those two words and realize he's talking to an audience that makes that assumption, then we get to see like the real revolutionary part of this is that he's saying, hey, treat them as heirs with you. An heir is someone who inherits, and often in ancient societies, women didn't have inheritance rights. And so Peter saying that these women, they are heirs with you, like they are inheritors, co-inheritors with you, like that is a revolutionary escalation of the rights of women in the ancient world. And he even says, like, hey, if you don't treat them as heirs with you, guess what? That'll hinder your prayers. He says, treat them with respect, be considerate to them, treat them as heirs with you. Otherwise, you might have your prayers hindered. Otherwise, like this might affect your line of communication with God. And so what's interesting is this is actually like a huge escalation of the power and equality of women considering the ancient context. And so instead of just jumping to conclusions and saying, "Oh my gosh, it says women are the weaker partner," like let's be real and realize that Peter is doing something revolutionarily like progressive for his society. There's this thing called the hermeneutic of trajectory. Some people call it a redemptive hermeneutic, but the hermeneutic of trajectory goes a little something like this. You look at the original ancient context. So, for example, in the ancient Canaanite context, back in the day, like prior to the Israelite entrance into the Promised Land, Canaanite women were not treated very well. In fact, they were property. It would be okay to just take someone as, like, for example, if you conquered another tribe or conquered another city, you could take someone as your wife, and if they didn't please you, you could just kill them as like a prisoner of war and like whatever, their property. But then what we see in the Mosaic Law is we see an escalation like above the culture, above the Canaanite culture. And so if you just read the Mosaic Law and you say, okay, there's still laws in there where like a man can take a wife from like as a prisoner of war and make her his wife. But like when we think about it and compare it to the culture, like the Canaanites, they could use them like property, but then the Mosaic law says, okay, you give them a grieving period to make sure that they have time to grieve the loss of their loved ones because of war. And then you take them on as a spouse, meaning that you take care of them, and they are now your legal spouse. So comparing it to the Canaanite culture, this is a huge step up. Also, we notice in the book of Judges, one of the judges is actually a woman, Deborah. And Deborah, like Barak, the general of the Israelite army, won't even go to battle without Deborah, the judge, the woman judge, with him. We also notice that there's like countless examples where like God makes a way for women in society, like the daughters of Zelophehad. God edits the law to give them the ability to inherit because they don't have any brothers. Even though women could not divorce their husbands and only husbands could divorce their wives, making sure that the husband produced a certificate of divorce was a big step up in rights for them, because then the husband actually had to go through some sort of legal process to terminate the marriage. He couldn't just like on a whim get rid of his wife. And so this is like a first step. The Canaanite culture and then the law and the judges, like this early Israelite history, escalates the values of women in that culture. And so then we have the Palestinian culture of the first century, and we have Jesus taking that previous law about marriage and then escalating it even further, saying, men, you've heard it said that you can give a certificate of divorce, but I tell you, no, don't do that unless there's been unfaithfulness. Like, stick with your commitment. You made a promise to her. You also notice then in the life of Jesus that it's not usually the men who are understanding things, but it's usually the women who really understand his message. Also, we know that the woman who bankrolled some of Jesus's ministry so that they could eat was one of the women from the household of Herod. So again, compared to the culture at large, Jesus escalates the values of women. And so again, in this Greco-Roman culture that Peter's writing into, probably in the 60s AD, um, Peter like is writing into a context, yes, where women are considered the weaker partner. However, Peter escalates the value as a member of the early church and says, no, they are co-heirs with you, right? You treat them as with respect, because they are also inheritors of the same grace that you got. We also have the Apostle Paul saying things like, there are no longer male nor female, slave nor free, Greek nor Jew. For all of us, like in Christ, those distinctions have disappeared. And so you'll notice that there's this trajectory, right, that points upward. It always takes where the societal line is and then escalates it above, takes the societal line and escalates it above. And where we notice that where it's all going is, well, not my face, but where all this is going is toward equality, right? And this type of hermeneutic should look kind of familiar because this is the same type of hermeneutic that we've used to give more rights to children. Because in ancient societies, like children, children could be left if they were undesired. But in the Bible, then it like encourages fathers, don't exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up. So like even children are being given rights and escalated toward not necessarily equality, but given more rights than the culture would have given them. And this is also why a lot of the early abolitionists who fought against slavery were actually Christians, because even though there were verses in the Bible that says, masters, like slaves, obey your masters, the Bible is radical in that it escalates the status of slaves and then talks to the masters and then says, hey, masters, treat your slaves in the same way, right? The ancient culture had some assumptions about what slaves were like. And so then the biblical authors then say, okay, well, let's address the issue by escalating the process. And so in the same way with slaves, women, children, we see this escalation of values. We see them to be lifted up compared to the cultural norms of their day. So even if in a verse like 1 Peter 3:7, we have, treat them as with respect as the weaker partner, let's not forget treat them with respect as heirs with you. Because that's like the point of his passage. He's like, okay, you guys already think this weaker thing, but man, let me tell you, they are heirs with you. You need to respect them. So just because there are things like this in the Bible doesn't mean that the Bible is backwards and regressive, but rather it's actually a progressive thing that brought us to the place where we are today to make the types of conclusions about equality that we make today. So that's your next assignment here in Canvas. There's an assignment called The Bible Sexist. So I want you to imagine you have a friend who reads 1 Peter 3:7. They're just going through their Bible, and they say to you, this is why the Christian religion is filled with sexist pigs. Look at what your Bible says in 1 Peter 3. So I want you to respond in this assignment. Respond to them meaningfully in at least 3 sentences, and use your knowledge of what I just shared with you to make your case that the Bible isn't sexist, that you can still read the Bible and be affirming of the rights of women. The last thing that we'll cover today, so thus far we've covered how marriage teaches us how to love, and thus far we've covered how marriage teaches us to respect and honor. This next chapter that you guys are going to go through, guess which is going to be the perspective of the book. Is it going to be, if we want to have better marriages, we should pray more? Or is it, if we want to have better prayers, we should marry? Think about it for a second. Remember, the thesis of sacred marriage is marriage may not necessarily be to make us happy, but to make us holy. So marriage is a tool to make us better people. So if you aren't sure, the main perspective of this article is going to be, if we want to pray better, because that's part of being holy, then marriage is a gateway. Marriage is a tool that can teach us how to pray better, just like it's a tool to teach us how to honor and respect better, and it's a tool for us to learn how to love better. So your exit ticket is to do those chapter summary notes. I kind of talked about it already. It's an old one by Katrina DeClaro a few years ago. And I need you to start the thesis, highlight 3 main points, and then, like I mentioned in the intro, Why is the author talking about sex in a chapter about prayer? So make sure that you cover all those bases. That's the end of what we're going to do for today. So, kind of like I said before, in the last little bit of class, in the last, I think I said at 12:30. Yeah, the last 15 minutes of class, I'll be in that Zoom room. This is totally optional. If you have any questions, you can pop in there. I'll be there to answer any questions or just to hang out and we can talk about the weather or whatever it is that we want to talk about. Hope you guys have a wonderful day. Peace out.